Hi, good afternoon, good evening. Today is August 13, 2025, and it's 7:36 p.m. U.S. Central Time. And I'm recording this video from my home at the 26714 Valleyside Drive, Katy, Texas, 77494. So today, this evening, I would like to. I'm sorry, I will be holding this because otherwise the sound gets damaged. And the other headset, I can't use it. So this evening, I wanted to talk about a couple of. I mean, these are not like technical observations or journal entries, really. This maybe is going to be a little bit more philosophical, I think. And I apologize. I think it's a byproduct of the incident of August 11. When they broke into my home and poisoned my water and my headset. I've noticed this pattern right in me, and I don't know. I haven't really researched it. I imagine it might be a common thing, right? A natural response. But I've noticed that when these things happen, I mean that they try to kill me. And after I become kind of philosophical. I don't know if philosophical is the right word, but I start reflecting on my own life. When I go through these, I would call them near-death experiences, right? Because they did poison me, and I see a real possibility that they could have killed me. It's inevitable, right, to look back and reflect on your life. So it might be a little bit of that, right? I don't know. I was also thinking that the first time this happened, right? I mean, I was thinking, like, when was the first time that I saw a possibility of dying, right? I think the very first time was in the year 2008. Okay, I went on a trip with Carolina Boscan. She invited me. I mean, I don't know. I invited her. Like, I paid for the trip, but she proposed the trip, right? And Carolina Boscan is an agent, right? And was an agent from the beginning, since the first time I met her in 2003 or 2002, I think. Yes, I met her right on the strike, during the oil strike that December. And I see now, right, that looking at the data, looking at everything, that it wasn't a coincidence. Like, it was the 7 that sent her. So Diosdado Cabello, basically. But anyhow, in that occasion, we went to a beach in one of those resorts in, I think it was Dominican Republic, if I recall correctly, and we almost drowned in the beach. So that was the first time that I almost died. Right? It was like, I don't know, like, she was there and she's an agent, but I don't think she would want to die herself. So I don't think it was intentional. That was the first time, right? And then during all my adult life, I never had any experiences where I felt that I could die until last year, when I was about to buy the second house. And a man driving a truck with the Scotland vanity plates, not Scotland, SCT LND, or as I have to look at the records. I don't recall exactly the spelling, but it's like an abbreviation for Scotland, and it's a dark SUV, a black SUV, like an older Escalade, and it's documented. I even found the house where it's parked. It's a house that is like a mile from my home, and it's documented in the website and everything. Harmony Meadows, I think is a street, or Harmony Lane, something like that. It's very close. It's documented. So anyhow, in 2024, when I was about to buy the other house, this man that now I believe could have been David Molero drove me off the road in the farm to market 1093, and this is recorded in the Tesla cameras, and It's documented. So that was the first time, and I remember that when that happened, right, my reaction, I didn't become reflective, but my reaction was to call my brother and say goodbye, like, because and I'm mentioning this because I think, maybe this could be recovered from Google, to prove that this really happened, right, that I'm not making this stuff up. My reaction was to say goodbye to my brother, because I saw a real possibility that, well, maybe that he didn't succeed in that opportunity, but I thought that, I calculated that it was possible that they could succeed, right, in the following days or weeks. But then as these things have become more frequent, right, over the last year and a half, I don't know, there's been many different attempts in different ways, right, to harm me with different levels of severity. Many of them could have resulted in my death. In one incident, they tampered with the brakes of my car. In another incident, they tried to run me over with a truck. In another incident, they tried to give me a heart attack by giving me diuretics while I was running long distances as a training program. And anyhow, when I realized that I could have died, I see now a pattern in me and myself that I start right after the incident reflecting on my own life, and because I see this pattern, I imagine it could be a thing, right, among survivors of near-death experiences. But I have to research that, right, because obviously, maybe I need to understand, right, why is that I get into this mode. But anyhow, besides that, the other reason I want to talk about this today is because I was chatting with the informant, and he was telling me a little bit about the counter campaign that Diosdado Cabello is preparing, right? So it's going to be, apparently, right? This is what I've heard. I don't know if this is true, but I guess in the following days we will know when they do or not do this, right? So apparently it's going to be a combination of discrediting and, like the things like just what I posted in the other video today, potentially, right? Like if they see an opening, if they can produce a situation that could be damaging to my credibility, they will do it. And he gave me a couple of ideas. I'm not going to discuss them here, but he gave me a couple of ideas of what they're thinking. And the other thing is that they're going to say that a few things, right? But they're all directed towards implying that I am a fabrication, right? That this person, I mean me, is not a real victim or a real target of this organization. I don't want to say victim because I've been very clear from the beginning that I don't see myself that way. But they're going to say that I'm a fabrication, right? That I was either. They're going to say multiple things, right? This is what I got from the informant. They're going to say that I was financed by foreign entities. So, for example, in the case of Diosdado Cabello, he's going to say, the American empire, trying to create a situation in which, to destabilize the country, to destabilize Venezuela, right? So they're going to basically try to fabricate an external enemy to then, unify the country. It's not really a country, it's really a conglomerate of prisoners, right, what they have. But they're going to try to unify them with that message, right, that I am a fabrication, a creation of a foreign power trying to destabilize their democracy. It's not a democracy, it's a tyranny. And then they're going to say, to achieve that goal, they're going to say that first that I was financed by a foreign entity, which, I've said this before, all my income for the last 20 years is auditable, and I have nothing to hide. All my income came from them, from, the income they gave me in these places where they gave me jobs. But they're going to say that, right? That I was financed, and then they're also going to say that I was helped, or that I was fed information to say, that I was helped, that I received information about what to say, or that things of that nature. That the things that I'm saying are fabrications, are scripted by an entity that it has an agenda. So the campaign they're setting up is basically to discredit me and to say that I'm a fabrication, right? So again, I have nothing to hide. Like everything is auditable. My income for the last 20 years is auditable to the penny, right? I haven't received one penny from any source that has not been, work income. And the stock that I've received from their companies, right? Because they employed me as part of their efforts to keep me prisoner, right? And nobody could have fed me any information besides the informants that work with them or for them, because they have me under heavy surveillance, real time. So like if I go as on Monday, right, I went for 16 minutes to that preschool, and they had a person next to me the entire time. So if anybody had fed me any information, they would say it, right? They would hear it. Like if I talk to anybody, they know, right? The house is bought. Anyhow, I think it's a futile enterprise what they're planning, but uh, it got me thinking, right? Like I think receiving that information from the informant, and also being in this mode of thinking or reflecting about my life, got me to remember, I guess, something that I wrote maybe a year ago or something, something around that time frame. And it's posted in the website. I'll try to recover it because I think it's a good piece of writing. It's something about a concept that I call the village. Okay, and so I want to talk a little bit about that because it's related to to the campaign that they're setting up, and you'll see what I mean. I want to say it verbally, although I think it's pretty clear in the writing, but I want to give specific examples, and you'll see what I mean, right? Because the other thing they're going to say is that how is it possible that I'm creating the the initiatives that I'm creating when I've had no experience in diplomacy, or the only world leaders that I've talked to are the people that they introduced me to, right, when they were trying to steal my code. Like I'm talking about President Leonel Fernandez from the Dominican Republic. I met him in person because they introduced him to me. Or Vivian Fernandez de Torrijos, the former First Lady of Panama. I met her because they introduced her to me, right, as part of a ruse. But they're going to say, right, that it's not possible that I could have this, that I could have done this alone, right? I think that's what they're going to say. Yeah, so back to the village, right? So the village, and I want to start by because I think, and when I say I think, is because I myself was not familiar with this phrase until I heard it the first time on 2018. And I imagine that many people that watch this video, or that will eventually watch this video, or may watch this video, may have the same barrier, right? Like they maybe have never heard this phrase, okay? So I'm going to start by introducing the phrase. So I'm going to start by saying when I heard that phrase. So the first time I heard that phrase was at Goldman Sachs, recently after I joined in 2018, okay? And this on itself is an example of what I'm going to elaborate on here, okay? So I heard this phrase because Goldman Sachs is an environment, it's full of, these high finance professionals, right? People that work in high finances. And they have this thing, right, where when they give presentations, they always want to sound sophisticated, right? And they are sophisticated. I mean, they're very highly educated. But I don't know. When I came, I mean, I remember I came from Google, right? I had spent 10 years or 9 years at Google, and I came from Google to that environment, right? And when I was transplanted to that environment, it was a transplant. It wasn't really a choice that I had, and this is documented before. Like the network moved me, and I signed the contract, but they took a series of active steps to steer me in that direction, right? When I came to Goldman from Google, it was kind of a cultural shock, like because these people were completely different than the crowd at Google. So I noticed all these little things, right? So one thing that I've noticed is that when they gave presentations, they always made the effort to, how do I say this, to again, they are sophisticated, like they are, they have expensive educations, and they are sophisticated. I'm not saying they're not, but they made the effort to show that they were, right? Like they always made sure to convey with subtle things that they did or said during the meetings to convey how sophisticated they were, right? It was almost like a symbol of a status, I guess. So one of the things that they did is that they always, in casual conversations, right? Like these people, like the managing directors and up, they would throw phrases like, quotes that made it clear that they were very educated and well read, right? So one of the quotes that I constantly heard from many of these managing directors at Goldman Sachs was the phrase, "It takes a village." Okay, and at some point I was talking. I think it was with Charles Elkan, if I recall correctly. I don't know exactly who, but I was talking to one of them, and I said, "Listen, I'm really sorry to ask you this, but these days there was no AI, right? That you could ask questions when you didn't know something, right? I mean, I could have Googled it, but I'm not afraid of sounding unsophisticated because that's not my thing." So I asked that person, I don't recall exactly who it was, but I asked him, like I said, like, "Listen, I'm really sorry to ask you this, but forgive my ignorance, but what does this phrase mean? Like, what is that takes a village? What is that?" And the other person explained it to me, and he said, "Well, that comes from a saying in African villages." Okay, and what it really means is that for these African tribes, or for many of them, uh, the concept of raising a child really means a community effort. In Western cultures, we think about raising a child as the product of the parents. Like, it's your child is your product, and the way you raise your child is you see it as an individual or maybe a couple effort. But according to this saying, African villages don't see it that way, right? They see the child as the product of the village, not of the parents. Everybody is involved. The parents, the grandparents, the siblings of the child, the other kids from the other families, the elders on the village, the priest. Everybody has a, some degree of participation in that child growing up and becoming a man or a woman, and being able to, like, live to his or her full potential. That comes from the entire community, not from an individual parent or two parents. So when they apply that phrasing in those meetings, right, what they're implying is that, well, they apply in different contexts, right? I think that the motivation was really to sound educated and sophisticated, but like usually the phrase came up in context of group effort or collaboration or um, diluting risk, right? That's the other thing. They have a concept of committees. Like in Goldman Sachs, everything is a committee. And I now understand that the reason, I mean, they say that it's because it takes a village, but I understand the reason now is because it dilutes liability, right? If they commit a crime, a financial crime, and the committee had 5 people, they cannot point fingers at each other and nobody's liable, right? Like it's very hard to prosecute crimes when you have 5 people, pointing in other direction. But anyhow, It takes a village, right? So that's the phrase. And in that writing that I'm referring to, when I wrote that, it was because I was reflecting on my life, and I thought that I realized that I'm the product of Travis Kalanick. That's Kalanick, and I have trouble pronouncing his last name. I wish one day I get to meet him in person. Right? Um, I wish I hope I get that opportunity one day. But anyhow, I realized that I'm his creation, right? And I know that sounds a little bit weird, but I really mean that, because like when all this started, that brought us all together today to this situation. This started in 2005, right? When I started creating classified websites that would compete or could compete with eBay. I was trying to compete with eBay, right? And this is what triggered them sending Diosdado Cabello behind me, right? In 2005, 20 years ago exactly, right? So what happened was, for some reason, well, and this is of course a bit of a speculation on my part because I cannot see what the reasoning was, right? But I applied the logic, like what other reason could they have had to do all this, right? So what happened is that they, of course, when I started creating the classifieds, they Anna started telling me that I should find a job, right? Because I was doing this full time, the classifieds. And she was, she started on a campaign that, well, I think you should find a job and do the two things in parallel. And of course, I went to find a job, and of course, the job I found, and I'm saying this based on the data that I captured from Elon Musk, that company was part of the network, right? So what they did was to employ me to basically spy on my phone and my internet connections and everything I did during the 8 or 10 or 12 hours that I was in the office. But then what happened is that they saw something, right? I don't know exactly what it was, but they saw something in me that made them think, well, maybe we can exploit this guy, right? Maybe we can get more out of him. So they took me to Shaw, a company, a better company, right? With better pay, with more sophisticated colleagues, more educated, more technically savvy, right? To do the same thing, but at a higher scale. And then at Shaw, I did something, and I think I know what it is. I started working. At that time, I was working on making the website super fast, the classified websites. And I was working in something that is called web performance, which is, it was back on those days, a very rare area of web development. Like nobody was thinking, well, not nobody, but like a very few people were thinking about web performance in that way, how to optimize the code to make the websites render faster, right? A faster user experience on rendering the page, like at the rendering engine level. And Stoyan Stefanov was an author writing books about this very topic. So what they did is that they took me from Shaw to the team where Stoyan Stefanov worked in Yahoo, California. So now they took me from Yahoo, and I'm saying this, and I don't mean to say that Canada is lower than the US or anything, but from a technical standpoint, working for Shaw Communications in Canada, it's a very good job. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, people will say, "Oh, you work at Shaw." Like, they will look to you with some degree of technical respect. But it's not the same as saying, I work for Yahoo in California. So Yahoo is a little bit higher in terms of professional respect, I would say. So now they took me from Shaw to Yahoo because they wanted to get me closer to that team where Stoyan Stefanov was, so they could spy on what I was doing and see what else could I produce for them, right? So they could steal it. But now I'm at California, right? And then at Yahoo, I did something pretty awesome. I'm not going to get into the technical details, but just to give an idea, on my own time, out of my own, I basically created my first distributed system without knowing what a distributed system was. And I did it to lower the build time of Yahoo search front end. It was a build time that took hours for every locale, right? So they had to build the templates for the engine, and it would take, I don't know, 4 hours to build all the different languages, right? So I took that from 4 hours to something like 3 minutes, using the same computers of my coworkers as workers, right? So I would ask them to install a piece of code in their computers, and then their computers would become workers for my distributed build system. If you think about it, it was a predecessor to what then became. I'm not saying that they copied this from me, but I had this idea years before distributed build systems became a thing. So they saw that and they say, no, let's take him to Google, right? And then they took me to Google. So now, they basically transfer me to the WIS team, the Google Web Server team, which is the most fundamental piece of infrastructure in Google's entire fleet of servers, where Carl Schultz was the manager, and they put me under Carl Schultz. So you see, in a short span of maybe 3-4 years, they took me from being unemployed in Calgary. I was unemployed. I was working on these classified sites, but I wasn't employed by anybody. They took me from that situation to being working directly in the code of Google Web Server in California, next to Carl Schultz, who is a prominent agent in this network. And then while I was there, I was during the nights, I was working on my own ideas, and I came up with an idea that would compete with Akamai. And when they saw that, they decided to take me to New York, right? I mean, California is pretty good, but if you think of sophistication or exposure to people from a different, I don't want to sound classist, but like it's just a different crowd, right? And so now they took me from Sunnyvale, California, or Mountain View, California, which are very small towns. I mean, yeah, they're the hub of technology, but if you go there and you see the environment, it's very suburban. There's not much cultural growth that you can have in Mountain View, California. That's what I'm trying to say. But now they took me to New York, right? And they put me next to Michael Schubert, right? And Mayur Thakur, and they gave me access to NAV Boost, right? So I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to convey is that my entire career history and my social interactions were fabricated by them, right? And therefore, the person I became, this person that is able to fight back, is a product of what they did during the 20 years. I mean, if I'm going to try to say it in a different way, all these interactions that I've had with managers, with coworkers in different places, even with girlfriends, right, that I've had that were agents of the network. Like, for example, Gillian Walsh, right? Like, Gillian Walsh is a super, I would say, smart, intelligent, sophisticated woman. Like, I don't think I've ever met a woman, that smart in my life. And I probably wouldn't have met any woman that smart in my life. Like, I mean, she's super, super, super smart, super sophisticated. And when I say I wouldn't probably met her, because I was in Calgary, unemployed. Like, how in the world would I have met a woman like Gillian Walsh, unemployed in Calgary, living in an apartment that costed me $600 a month, right? It was out of my reach, but they drove me to those situations, and in those situations they educated me, right? All those were learning opportunities for me that I would not have had otherwise. Another good example, well, before I get into those examples, let me drive that point home, that the way I see it, the person I am is a product of a series of synthetic situations that don't happen organically. So all the training I've had in all these different, at Google, I had the opportunity to work in ranking, in indexing, in machine learning, like all these different areas of software development, because they moved me around depending on their needs, right, on what they wanted to get out. But in the process, I've learned about all these different technologies. Today, I've used all these technologies, fighting with them and winning this battle. And I would have not had that knowledge if it wasn't because of them in the first place. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if you look at the growth of an individual from a career standpoint only, like from um, from looking at professionally, right? If the growth or progression or of learning and development of a person is organic, it would never get to even close to what they gave me, right? I mean, what they gave me was really a gift. Of course, it came with a price, right? It came with the price that, they encircled me and isolated me for 20 years. That was the cost. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that as in everything in life, you cannot look at, the negative only, to look at the positive as well. The positive is all what they gave me, all that learning, all those opportunities, all those interactions with people that I would not have access to organically ever, right? And all that is the combination of all that, what made me whatever it is that I am today, good or bad, right? So I guess I'm saying all this, right? Because when they come out and say that it's not possible that I came up with these ideas or with this technology on my own, yes, it's possible because you trained me to do it, right? For 20 years. That's the explanation. It's not, as in that movie, that famous movie, the simpler explanation is probably the right explanation. That is more likely than some malicious foreign power came and financed me and educated me to fight with you, right? That is a stretch. Anyhow, the two good examples I want to show of this in action, right? One is, so I was writing yesterday about my, the plan I'm executing. I didn't come up with this yesterday. I've been thinking about this problem of how I'm going to get around the blockage of information that Diosdado Cabello has imposed on me for the last 3 years. I've been thinking about this long and hard for many months. But I just wrote about it yesterday because, it's part of my strategy, right? It's not what you say, it's if you say it in the right moment or not. So, right. So, check and balances, right? I realized that information asymmetry is the weapon with what they use to justify whatever is unjustifiable, right? Because there's no accountability when only one party has all the information. And that I guess what I'm trying to say is that I knew of the concept of check and balances and the connections to to the Greeks and the basis of the first democracies that are recorded in history, not because I went to Stanford or to Harvard or I didn't. I learned from that because one of their agents, Alicia Lucinova, who is now spying on election officials in Arizona, she, while we were both in New York, posing as a romantic interest, took me to a philosophy school called the Philosophy Works next to the house of Bloomberg, who was then the mayor of New York City. So, put that in perspective. Just a few years back, before that, I was unemployed in Calgary, and now I was receiving philosophy classes in Manhattan, next to the residence of the mayor of New York City. And this was only possible because of the network, right? Of course, they took me to that not to educate me. They took me to that school to spy on me, to surround me with Eastern European students of philosophy and Chinese students of philosophy that could spy on my phone and take the cookie so they could steal Google's source code. Right? That was the goal, to have the cookie of my phone every single minute of the day in case it changed, okay? But what happened is that I went to the classes and I actually paid attention to the classes and I learned about the concepts being explained in the classes. And now I know about, how is that a democracy works and why it functions and why it doesn't break unless they do what they do, right? So all that learning came from the philosophy classes that Alicia took me to. That's one good example, right? The other good example is the crime boost encoder, okay? And I'm saying this because this is verifiable, right? When they say that somebody came and gave me these ideas, authorities of any country that I've talked to or sent letters to, they could go and check the records of that school and of what I'm going to say next, and you can see that this is true. So the crime boost is encoder, right? Encoding intelligence information in the cover of the book, right? I see that myself, and I see beauty on that idea. It's beautiful. It's you know, it's. I mean, I created the idea, and I see it, and I say, I can't believe I had this idea, but it wasn't my idea really. It's an idea that they gave me, and I'm gonna say who gave me that idea. So that idea came to me from the mouth of Matthew Pappas from Goldman Sachs. So what happened was, and this is verifiable, I encourage authorities to go and talk to Mr. Pappas, which I probably, I would say you have to talk to him anyways, right? But while you are at it, ask him if this is true. So what happened was Sinet Strain and Scott Weinstein were in this campaign of harassment, right? And the idea there was to make my life miserable so I could not work on Calcularo Health, which was like Calcularo Health was the name of a company I created in 2017, I think. But it was basically key opinion leaders applied to EMRs. That was the basic idea. So it's the same technology that I'm even using today to fight with the spies, but applied to a very narrow segment of healthcare informational systems. So Travis Kalanick was at that time, because he was working on, he doesn't work in anything. He's just the figurehead, right? But he had at that time Careo with K, which is an EMR, and he wanted to steal this to incorporate it in Careo, and he did steal it using Ana Codallo and Silvio Gutierrez and Álvaro Gutierrez and Mario Eugenio Rojas and Nelson Lara, to the point that at one point Nelson Lara registered a corporation with a variation of the name, right? I mean, they went all in to steal that code. Yeah, Nelson Naras and Rafael Ramirez, the supposed uncle of Maria Eugenia, which I don't think he's the uncle at this point, but that's what they told me. Anyhow, so Sinet Strain and Scott Weinstein were in this campaign of harassment, like literally harassing me with the legal department of Goldman Sachs and with employee relations. And so they had the people reporting to me, filing complaints against me for discrimination, for like all sorts of things, right? To make my life miserable. So I could not work on the other thing because I was occupied, thinking about all these fictitious problems that we're creating. So when that happened, I filed a complaint with HR at Goldman Sachs against Scott Weinstein. And of course, now that creates a record, right? I imagine they can expunge or delete that record. I mean, they control the entire company. But, because they're careful and they have lawyers working for them, what they did is that they moved me to a different manager. And at the same time, they gave me a mentor to work on my cultural issues. Right? That's the way they phrased it, meaning implying that they weren't harassing me, that it was just me that was not playing well with them and the environment, right? That mentor was Matthew Pappas, right? Matthew Pappas didn't really mentor me, like he didn't really give me any useful information except for one thing, and one thing only, on the first day that I met him, the first time. And it was exactly the crime boost encoder. That's what he gave me, okay? The other meetings, he was just like rambling, and he didn't give me anything useful. And I think he was a bit intimidated by my technical skills. Like every time I tried, and he was supposed to be a technical manager, but every time I tried to talk or touch a technical subject, he would divert the conversation to something else. But anyhow, on the first day, he did give me something pretty useful, which I took to heart and learned it. And it's the crime boost encoder, right? So we were talking, I'm just going to tell you the story because I think it's pretty ironic, right? That he gave me that, right? So So he said, right? So we were talking about Scott and Sinead and all the other players, right, in that environment. And then he started talking to me about circles of influence, right? And he recommended to me that I should look for people that could support my ideas, because the other problem I had is that every project that I proposed or suggested that we could do, Scott would kill it or oppose to it, or because of course they didn't want me to produce anything that could be relevant or that could elevate my status, because their goal was to discredit me, because if if an intellectual property lawsuit with Travis Kalanick eventually arised or came up, and I had a track record of being technically proficient in paper, like in the records of the company, I could use that to defend the intellectual property lawsuit. So it was important that they always gave me, I don't want to say bad performance reviews, but like so, right? Like they always made sure that I did not shine in those performance reviews in Goldman Sachs, okay? Because the objective, right, at the end was to steal the technology. They could not create a paper trail that would say that I was technically proficient as to being able to invent the idea that they stole, right? So it's pure logic. So, so anyhow, the problem I was trying to solve when I talked to Matthew Pappas was how to get my ideas across all these people that were blocking them, like Richard Bennett was the other one, right? In all these companies, they always set up an antagonist whose only job, apparently, is to block the ideas of the target. In Goldman Sachs, it was Richard Bennett, Mayur Thakur, and Scott Weinstein, right? So I was talking to Pappas, and Pappas starts telling me, well, I think what you should do is you need to try to find people that can sponsor your ideas, that can, support you, so you can get the resources you need to build these incredible systems you're talking about. And he started talking to me about circles of influence. And then he took a white piece of paper and a pen from his drawer, and he started drawing points of different sizes and putting names to them. So, this is your Rinaldo in the middle of the page. And then, this is Adam Korn. And then he drew a big circle, right? Very close to me. And then, well, a smaller circle, but even closer to me was Scott Weinstein, because the Scott Weinstein organization, it was below, right? So what he was doing there really was representing visually a two-dimensional chart of, degree of influence, a score, right? And proximity to, in this case, in his example, Rinaldo, right? And it's a powerful visual when you see it. If you do this exercise yourself, who are the people in your life that are close to you, far to you, and how much saying they have on the outcomes of your life? Do this exercise. I recommend it to you. It's a very powerful exercise because it shows clearly, very clearly, which are the points that you need to hit to get what you need to get done. Okay. So this principle that he explained in that piece of paper beautifully, he did a super good job at explaining that. I would have not come up with that idea myself in 1,000 years. But it's a powerful visual representation of who is holding the keys to what, right? And where and how, and in combination with who. And then, if you add to that the technique of clustering actors together, because, you can draw them using distance and size as metrics, but you can also physically cluster together the people that work together or that have some sort of connection, right? And then the chart becomes even more powerful. That's why you see in that, that agent with the white Tesla in the cover of the book, the plate says Texas, right? It's very symbolic. And then on top of the plate, then there's Greg Abbott, who's the governor of Texas, and all these players that are in the car are Texas players, right? I mean, of course, a person that is not looking for these visual clues will not get them probably, but my intention is to explain the encoder. And if I explain the encoder in a way that it's easy and fun to look at, people will, look at the cover and will say, "Oh, I see what he means by this." Right? It's a very powerful communication tool, and and I cannot say this enough. The information that is encoded in that book cover comes from the database of Elon Musk. This is not Ronaldo's view of the world, or Ronaldo's guesses or inferences. Those sizes are computed based on metrics derived directly from the database created by Elon Musk in 2002, which was given to me by Diosdado Cabello indirectly. Right? So this cover, in the way it's produced, transmits in just one page a tremendous amount of intelligence to the entire planet, because it encodes information about the importance in this criminal enterprise of hundreds of people and the relationships in the way they're clustered in the image. So this idea is not an idea that some following power gave to me. This was given to me by Matthew Pappas in 2019. And the idea about implementing or forcing a check and balances mechanism within the communications to governments around the world didn't come to me from a foreign power. That came to me from the philosophy works school in Manhattan that Alicia Lucinova took me to in 2013. So yeah, I think these are two interesting examples of what I mean when I say that it takes a village, right? In my case, the village was the combination of all these synthetic situations they created and put me physically in over the last 20 years that to imprison me and to, steal my ideas and my code and to, keep me, keeping a lead on me in a way, right? But at the same time, that village, right? And in a way, right? Like if you think about this street, like these neighbors that on Monday were coordinating, and it's obvious in the recordings, they were coordinating to facilitate the break into my house to kill me. So the village they design, and even this street is a village, right? The counterintelligence techniques that I've developed, how did I develop them? By observing the agents. I would have never in my life observed these thousands of agents working every day if they haven't put me in this street, right? So this on itself is a village of them. And in this case, on Monday, the village was supposed to kill me. I mean, they were collaborating, all of them, for the break-in to happen. But the ironic part in all this is that not only this small village, but all the other villages where they put me over the last 20 years, none of them killed me. They made me stronger. They educated me. They gave me knowledge, tools, learning opportunities. I met interesting people. I met inventors. I met, super high-end lawyers, philosophers, you name it. And all those interactions made me, there's no other way to say it. I'm a product of Travis Kalanick. And for that, I'm thankful, because I wouldn't be the person I am. I wouldn't have Marcelo if it wasn't for Travis Kalanick. Yeah, I think that says it all. So anyhow, you wanted to put that on the record. So it's very clear that any information I have and any resources I've had, they gave them to me to keep me prisoner, but they gave them to me. And the irony lies in that I'm using them to, defeat them. So anyhow, I think it's a good point to cut this one off. Thank you again for listening, and see you soon.